Sweep, sweep, sweep. Every day, just sweep, sweep. Bits of dust and specks of dirt from customers who drop by every day. Nothing too crazy for our young Bob to handle. It was a job, and it paid the same as any other substandard job. There were generic tasks to do throughout the day, such as setting out the signs, cleaning the windows, making generic tea for the customers, and dusting the skulls. Oh yes, I forgot to mention, this was a shop of curiosities. Now our dear Bob didn't quite know exactly what kind of business he had applied for. The requirements for the job were simple after all. When the blonde-haired man arrived at the old ornate door with oddities in the window display, well, he didn't mind it at all. Just shrugged and walked in without a care. Not even for the job, really. But the young man had much to buy and not enough earned from what his parents refused to pay for. So he's here, sweeping in his brown apron and yellow t-shirt with baggy jeans. Every few minutes, Bob let out a sigh, clearly not entertained by his work. He wasn't alone, though. His boss was always present, of course. A tall fellow, with a black bowler hat, shoulder-length dark hair, and an old-fashioned vest with a white dress shirt. It seemed like a costume to Bob, but it was the leather gloves that the blonde found odd. Every day, his employer wore the same gloves, never taking them off. Bob questioned this choice of clothing only once, which his boss responded,
"Are you aroused by looking at another person's hands?"
Bob snapped up straight and turned away as fast as possible.
Nope, never mind, sir.
It was that very moment when the young man realized not to ask certain questions of his employer. There was just something about an elderly man who might expose something else that unsettled dear Bob. Nope. Best not to think about it. Back to work he went. After his morning cleaning was finished, Bob would be tasked with prepping the shop for special customers. His boss had a very detailed, handwritten note, too fancy for the simple youth to understand, which personalized every special customer's experience in the shop. It seemed highly excessive, but Bob promised himself not to ask another question. There was one customer that seemed to enjoy tea that was brewed from water heated from a hot stone that was baked in an old wooden oven. It took hours to prepare the oven in the back room, so the boss had Bob tend to it first thing in the morning. The leaves were added from a specific jar on the second shelf, third from the left. It had a fancy name dear Bob couldn't care to look up. They all looked the same, smelled the same. At least, that's what Bob thought. Should any of the jars even slightly touch the wrong spot on the shelf, the boss would correct Bob from the other room.
"That is incorrect."
At least the young man never had to worry about giving the wrong customer the wrong tea. No one truly needs to be yelled at for something so minor. Although it should be noted that Bob never had to deal with any customers. A lucky perk of the task he was given during the day. He really didn't want to speak or deal with anyone anyway. When the tea was finished brewing, the boss would enter the room, correct the drink that Bob would always mess up, and deliver it to the customer out front. Then the young employee would continue with his next task, never seeing the customer. After brewing came cleaning, but not the regular type of cleaning.
"Submerge the stone in the black marble bowl with celery and place the lid from the cupboard at your feet on top. Then bury it in the dirt outside that I labeled with a circle. Do not dig outside the circle. If you do, I will have to make another circle."
That was the note from his employer. Just like misplacing the jars of tea, his boss knew when Bob would make a mistake. Almost like the boss was constantly spying on Bob, which made the young man glance over his shoulder for cameras whenever going to the bathroom. After a few weeks, he refused to go at all. No matter how hard Bob tried to purposely mess up to catch his boss watching him, there was no evidence of anyone or any technology creeping on him. He even put his phone down to record what his boss was doing while Bob shuffled the teas around. The footage was the same each time. His boss just had a very annoying sixth sense. It was still very creepy, and Bob would never find comfort in dropping his pants in a private room. While Bob managed his daily bowel movements around his work schedule, more odd customer preferences showed up. Some were just needless busywork that the young employee assumed meant he was unworthy to be seen at all. There were tasks such as reorganizing boxes that were already organized, laying out pens to make a star, then placing them back in the container, or flipping a bowl upside down. Always something odd. It wasn't until a specific customer was expected. Rather than hand the employee a written note, the boss stood in front of Bob with a gravely serious tone.
You are not allowed to sigh nor speak today. You must cover your ears and your eyes. Not a sound should be heard, nor a sound made, nor a sight of our incoming guest. You will stand facing the wall in the back and wait. I will fetch you when they have left.
Dumbfounded, Bob couldn't believe his ears. Be completely blindfolded? Was his employer about to grope him or something worse?
Why don't I just leave for today? You don't have to pay me.
There is work to be done, but if you do not wish to be employed here, then consider yourself terminated.
No, okay, I'll do it, but
Do not try your regular phone tricks. It will be very disrespectful to our guest.
Feeling a bit blackmailed into such an awkward position, Bob begrudgingly did as asked. He clutched his fist tight, ready to clobber his boss should anything freaky happen. But nothing did. The young man stood as told, facing the wall in pure silence due to the earplugs his boss gave him. Odd-looking ones, gray and weirdly twisted, but effective. A black cloth over his eyes that seemed devoid of all light. More of his boss's possessions. It took about an hour. 1 hour of complete boredom. When it was done, the boss called out to Bob.
You may return now.
Weird. He shouldn't be able to hear anything at all. The young man removed his blindfold and earplugs, squinting at the light peeking from the window.
why did you want me to do that? That was stupid.
Bob marched out from the back, being alone in the dark for far too long. His boss wouldn't glance at him and merely continued tinkering with some old mechanism.
Rotate the back room counterclockwise by 90 degrees.
Confused and annoyed, Bob huffed and glanced at the room behind him.
What do you mean rotate? I've already reorganized everything yesterday.
No, not organize. Move everything in the room 90 degrees counterclockwise of its current position
What? Why?
for tomorrow's client.
Bob was seething. This was a task he'd accomplished before, when the young man was calm and caring about standing in silence for an hour. Now he was merely furious Bob. The young man grumbled and stomped with every intention of disturbing his employer as he carelessly did his task. Night approached, and still the room was not yet ready for tomorrow. But Bob was ready to leave when his boss stopped him.
You have not finished.
The young man fumed.
What do you mean? It's gonna take all night to do and my time is up. I'm going home. It'll get done tomorrow, you crazy boomer.
Bob glared and passed his employer as he headed out the front door with his jacket on. A creepy voice crawled over his shoulder.
Do not return tomorrow.
Feeling a chill down his spine for some odd reason, Bob shouted at the door, refusing to look at his boss.
Fine, I won't.
The door slammed and Bob marched home, rage calling his best friend Carlos.
Bruh. What?
Fucking creepy old fucking asshole.
Dude, what happened? You good?
Walked out of my fucking boss tonight. Asshole made me stand in a creepy ass room with a blindfold on.
What the fuck? Dude, why would you do that?
I don't know, I wasn't thinking, I just wanted money.
Wow, dude. Wow. Okay.
Fuck you.
So your website is called bobgotfucked.com?
Shut up.
All right, serious. What else happened?
He wanted me to stay all night moving stupid boxes around again.
While you were blindfolded?
What? No, after that.
Were you naked?
Do you want pics? I'll send you one of my ass.
So nothing happened while you were blindfolded?
No, it was just weird.
Oh, then what's the problem?
I don't know. It was just weird and I'm pissed off. Then he wanted me to stay late and work.
So you quit?
Maybe? He told me to go home. I didn't really say I was quitting.
Are you gonna go back though?
Ugh. I don't know.
I mean, if you don't want to work there, that's fine. But didn't you need money for that graphics card?
Yeah. My old card broke.
I mean, you put that F on that corner and I'll buy.
I hate you.
Yeah, it's either, you get it from me or you get it from him.
Fuck you.
Bob took the next day to search for a new job. However, it was a fruitless waste of energy. No one wanted the young worker, especially when he would describe why his old job sucked. The morning after, he shuffled his feet back to the door of his old boss. Bob quietly poked his head through the door, wishing to still have a paying job, but refused to apologize.
Hey.
Bob's voice cracked like an awkward teenager. The owner of the shop was at the front counter, tinkering away.
We have a delivery today. Clean the shop before it arrives.
The young employee nodded. Good. No apologizing needed, and he still had a job. As Bob headed to the washroom to put on his apron and store his bag, the owner eerily cautioned him.
As you receive our package today, be sure not to let your ever-fading curiosity peer into its contents. It would be a most egregious error on your part.
Well, if dear young Bob had no curiosity before, it was surely growing with his employer's tease. Did he truly think that the young man wouldn't want to look into a box after hearing that? The employer must have known. If the boss had said nothing, Bob probably wouldn't even inquire at all. Typical Bob. The young employee cleaned the store, swept and dusted all the oddities before a knock at the front door alerted him. Delivery time. The owner kept to himself, placing tiny gems on what appeared to be a fashion accessory of some sort. Bob turned the knob and greeted a very cheerful delivery lady, dressed in what appeared to be a cafe uniform. Was she a customer? She held out a medium-sized wooden box and smiled.
Everything was prepared from fresh ingredients today. Please enjoy.
She handed the box over to Bob. The contents seemed light compared to the weight of the wooden frame. That is when the young man noticed the engraved words on the top of the box that read, tea. Ah, just tea. The employer was clearly teasing the young man, who cared not for tea at all. Bob let out a pitiful pout and glared at his boss. The door closed and the young man brought the package back with a huff, letting out a loud and annoyed tone as he spoke.
Oh, wow, a box of tea. How exciting. I'm so excited to carry this super interesting box. Wow. I better not look inside or else I might want to drink this crap.
Thunk. The box was dropped onto the backroom counter. Bob heard a subtle chuckle from the front room. He leaned out of the back room, glaring from a 40-degree angle.
Hey, you done having fun? Aren't you supposed to be working?
Bob teased that last part, still wanting to keep his job. The boss didn't respond. All the old man did was continue with the project he was working on. During one of his breaks, Bob whined to Carlos.
I hate this guy. He's pranking me with tea now.
Huh?
Yeah, he's all, look at this super awesome box. Don't look inside. It's tea.
Dude, if he's hiding anything in that box, it's gotta be drugs.
Nice. Wait, you think it's drugs?
Come on, man. You think the bills get paid selling dead skulls? He's gotta have a side hustle.
Oh, shit. Okay, I'll find out what it is.
If it is, get some.
Wanting revenge, Bob decided to work a little late that night, in hopes that he'd be left alone with the shop to investigate the mysterious box.
Hey, old man, Why don't I close tonight so you can take a break?
Bob asked while approaching his boss in the front room. The employer was rearranging an odd collection of unrecognizable feathers from the display cabinet on the left side of the room.
Old man.
Oops. That was what Bob called his employer in his head. A bit disrespectful when trying to keep your job.
I mean, boss. Take a break tonight.
There was a low hum in thought from his employer. His bony arm rose, and with one leather finger he slowly scratched his bowler hat.
I suppose it would be most advantageous to inquire how my other business is succeeding.
Other business, Same as this shop?
Young Bob's thoughts circled around his boss being a drug lord.
No, it is this shop's supplier. You met them earlier. They are also my employee.
The tea lady, or maybe the drug lady, as Bob saw it. He just nodded, letting his imagination run wild.
Well then, I'll clean up and close up shop. Anything else I can do to free you up?
His boss glanced around the shop. This might have been the first time the old man ever left early.
When I close the door behind me, place these stones across the bottom and burn a pinch of powdered curiosities in the spalted oak vessel. That should be enough.
Hearing it out loud, instead of just finding matching text on the cabinets, finally made Bob realize that his boss might be a highly superstitious New Age hipster drug lord. Either way, tonight he was going to delve into his boss's secrets.
Sure. I'll get to it.
As the young employee tried to rush his employer out, the old man turned back to caution him.
It will be a most dangerous night should any error occur. Can I trust you to succeed where directed?
Bob paused, feeling like that was a threat, but knew he'd get to the bottom of this nonsense soon.
I won't skip a single step.
Grabbing his fancy black coat, the employer left, tilting his hat to his employee. Curious, Bob waited cautiously in case it was a ruse. He pretended to sweep, heading towards the door, listening intently for footsteps walking away. Nothing was heard, and he leaned his ear on the door, then raised himself to look at the top window. His boss stood there staring back at him. Bob jumped back, startled by his creepy boss, and held in a shout. He quickly grabbed the stones, fumbling to get them near the door. Then he heard his boss walk away. Heavily sighing, the young blonde growled at the door.
Creepy asshole!
Angrily, the young man kicked open the front door, dropping the stones outside, ready to yell at his boss. But there was no one around.
Guess he finally left. Fucking dick.
Slamming the door and locking it quick, Bob rushed to the back and opened the box that was delivered today. Dried leaves shuffled inside.
Is this really just tea? How do I know if it's drugs?
Eyeing the leaves suspiciously, he took a long sniff and choked.
Oh, this reeks! What the hell is this shit?
It didn't smell like cannabis. It smelled like something rotten, like meat you left in the fridge for a month. Quickly, Bob put the lid back on the box in case it was poisonous.
Shit! Am I gonna get fucked up from this?
Coughing out of fear, Bob inspected the box further for what the contents might actually be. There was a single label, Alveolus pulmonis.
Ugh!
Grunting out of frustration from all these fancy terms his boss used, Bob whipped out the ultimate gibberish translator. Lugals. After a quick web search, he cursed in confusion.
The fuck? Is this medicine for lungs, I guess? What?
All the web searches pulled up was a lung muscle. While Bob scrolled through the searches, hoping to find a more concrete definition, a news video caught his eye.
Early this morning, a victim of extensive drug abuse, covered in blood, collapsed in Kensington. Witnesses described the victim as having large cuts down their right arm, a hole in their chest. Doctors say the cause is from hallucinations and are prescribing even more dangerous drugs. Can we really trust our healthcare system?
Bob's heart beat quickly as this strange article kept in his mind. Sure, crazy stuff has happened under the influence of drugs, but will he turn out like that other person? Panic filled the young man's mind, not knowing what he could have inhaled.
Shit.
Sitting under the lights that began to flicker, Bob searched further into the article. Using another app to find more information, Twit posts revealed another video someone had taken of the incident. It was a horrific scene. Blood everywhere, standing in the middle of the street. The victim seemed to be looking at something. Bob's eyes squinted at the unfocused video towards the shop behind the drugged-up person. Coming soon was all the detail he could get, but something else was wrong. Repeating the footage over and over with growing panic inside his veins, a woman was standing, hidden in the crowd. The delivery woman, smiling cheerfully like nothing was wrong. Bang! The front door burst open, and the lights went out. A cold wind rushed into the shop, and a loud growl echoed into the back room. A startled Bob quickly gathered the phone he'd dropped, and hid under the table with a bunch of boxes.
Shit.
Cursing quickly at himself, knowing his boss must have come back to murder him, or something worse. Bob covered his mouth, trying not to breathe hard, but found it impossible to be as quiet. As the door slammed shut and a noisy shuffling creeped into his ear, the growling got angrier and louder. Bob held out his phone, shaking in fear, trying to peer around the corner. He began recording, hiding the phone's brightness with his large palm. Unsure of what it could capture in the darkness, the moment the camera crept around the corner, there was a boom of growls and rustling that violently shook the building as if an earthquake had hit it. Bob braced himself against the table, waiting for the tremors to pass. Then, it was silent. Foggy breath poured out of the young employee's nostrils. The air was frozen, and he began to shiver. It seemed like hours passed as Bob waited for any sound that someone was still there. Whatever it was that caused the sound seemed to be gone, or standing too still to be human. Too much anticipation built up in the blonde, and he glanced around for something to throw. He found a random chunk of wood and threw it at the back door. It banged and the hinges jittered, but nothing reacted to it. Hoping it was safe, the young employee shakily crawled out from the table. It was then that he could smell something burning. Did someone set a fire? Bob immediately ran to the front room, looking for the fire. It was just darkness. Squinting, he sniffed the air and looked for the source of the burning smell. There, glowing faintly in the dark, was the small embers on the wall counter. Bob repeatedly flicked the light switch on and off, but the electricity wasn't working. Busting out his phone's light, he walked cautiously over to the burning source. Whatever it was, burnt down into dust in an oak bowl.
This is the bowl the boss mentioned.
Turning the flashlight towards the door revealed more. Stones aligned the bottom of the floor, the same ones he dropped outside. Bob walked closer to the entrance, but something brushed against his cheek, and he jumped, crashing against the counter.
Who's there?
Bob meekly cried out. Feathers. Odd feathers were scattered all over the floor, some falling from the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, it seemed like they were the ones from the display cabinet. His boss must have been there. Who else would have come in?
Hey! You there, boss?
Lacking all firmness in his voice, Bob glanced over the room again and again. He peeked into the washroom corridor and the back room, but no one was there.
Just go home,
he told himself. It's probably the drugs he inhaled, causing illusions like the other person in the news. With his backpack quickly tossed over his shoulder, he sprinted to the door, knocking over the stones, and ran outside into the darkness. There was no light. Not even the moon was out. The ground was barely visible. He knew he was walking forward, but it was too intensely dark to see. The phone's light did nothing, but it did give him some slight comfort as he hoped he was moving towards his home.
Where am I?
Where was his home? Where was he? No street signs, or even a path to guide him. An hour passed, maybe 2. He couldn't tell what time it was anymore. His phone's battery had died already, and he hadn't thought to message anyone for help. Bob's mind just wouldn't focus on anything but the fear of the drugs inside him that made him hear that beastly growl. It was in his mind so clearly, it was almost like something was growling all around him as he walked.
It's just the drugs. It's just the drugs. It's just the drugs.
Repeating it over and over, Bob's eyelids slowly began to close as his energy was almost drained. He reached out his arms wearily, hoping to feel anything like a lamppost or a fence or even a building wall. Nothing. Eyes almost completely closed and feet throbbing in pain. The young employee stumbled.
Go home.
A tight grip on Bob's shoulder jerked him to stand, and he opened his eyes to the bright sunset peering through the shop's door. It burned his eyes as he glanced around. Bob was holding a broom, and his employer was behind him, keeping him standing with one hand on the employee's shoulder inside the shop.
Go home now.
The employer called out in a serious tone. Bob shook his head. Everything was there. He looked quickly at the display of undisturbed feathers.
Did the drugs wear off?
He accidentally spoke out.
Go home.
His boss began to push him out of the shop, taking the broom and handing the employee his backpack. Apron still on, Bob stumbled as he was shoved out of the door, which slammed shut behind him. Everything around him was normal.
Fuck, what the fuck was that?
Bob glanced back at the shop one last time before his plummeting energy reminded him he'd been on his feet for too long.
Was I dreaming that? But was it drugs? Fuck, I gotta stop listening to Carlos.
As he began his journey home, Bob told Carlos about the dream.
Dude, he fucked you up. What's he look like? Hold on. I bet you I can find him online.
I don't know, he's old, tall, skinny, wears gloves all the time.
What else?
He wears a bowler hat, got dark brown scraggly hair, about shoulder length. That's it.
Yo, the name listed under the shop is Monkey Paw. Is that his name? What the fuck is that?
I never knew his name.
Dude, you're gonna get shanked one of these days if you don't pay attention to shit. What about his face?
Well, he's... His face.
Bob spoke out loud. He couldn't picture his boss's face. There should have been a video of his boss somewhere on his phone. Bob did try to take a few videos after all.
What the... Why can't I see his face?
Video after video played, and all of them had a dark blurred mark on the boss's face. Like it was out of focus, just on that one spot. That was when Bob noticed a new video, taken in a dark room. He played it back, and it was the events of last night. Hiding under the table with something growling. The camera peeking around the corner, revealing some blurry but large, snarling, dark mass.
What the hell?
Bob sent the footage immediately to his friend.
Dude, he's fucking with you.
That was too real, man.
Well, yeah, that's how you can get fucked up on drugs. What'd you take anyway?
I don't know.
Bro, you need to get him back for that.
Yeah, fuck this guy. I'm gonna get him back tomorrow. Fuck this job.
During that night, the young man went over a plan to get revenge on his boss, with Carlos's help. The next morning, autumn's sun peeked into the shop's windows, and Bob walked in with a smug grin. Too smug. His boss noticed immediately.
Are you well?
Bob just nodded in annoyance, his smirk fading as he went to the back room. The employer dropped off Bob's task on the counter and returned to minding the front. Flaring his nostrils, the young blonde glanced at the note quickly.
Conceal yourself in the Peru Paparisu skull and block your ears before 12:23 p.m. Our client requests privacy today, so remain in the garden and fill the cedar hollow with powdered argue root until I call for you.
Smirking, the young man quickly texted his friend. Instead of committing to all of the written tasks, Bob was going to scare the client and humiliate his employer. All on camera. Tick, tick-tock. The minutes gained on the allotted time.
Oh, God.
Bob was already in an odd pig skull that had an intensely overpowering musky smell. Standing in the back garden to avoid his employer's suspicion, the young man watched the time hit 12:23 p.m. and the text was sent.
Go.
At the front entrance stood Carlos, same age as Bob, with a brown sweater, black pants, and a curly dark brown hair. He chuckled and tried to enter the shop, but it was locked.
Shit, he locked it.
What? Fuck. Can you see if his customer's inside?
Hold on, let me check.
The companion narrowed his eyes, trying to peer through the windows that were too darkened to see any visible shapes.
Bro, I can't fucking see. It's too fucking tinted.
What tint?
I bet he's dealing right now. Fuck it, I'm gonna yeet this shit.
Before Bob could respond, he heard a loud crash from what he assumed was his friend breaking in the door. Camera on, it's go time. The young employee quickly creeped back into the shop, closing the door gently behind him.
Hey, yo, man. I heard you like peeping on kids. I got a new pedal mag here for you.
Carlos's voice shouted from the front room. Bob stifled a chuckle and continued to shuffle his feet across the floor towards the doorway. He couldn't see anyone just yet. Bang! It sounded like the front door slammed shut. Carlos must have run off. That was fine. He did his job well. Before stepping into the open doorway, the sound of odd clicking reached Bob's ears. No one seemed to be talking. Only odd clicks echoed off the walls around the corner. Finally, with camera in hand and an ugly, stinking pig skull, Bob stood in full presence of the mysterious customer.
Oh, look at this pedo party.
It was hard to see through the skull, but from what he could gather, his boss was standing at the counter, not looking at him. The clicks were coming from the old employer. It appeared the boss was looking at someone, but no one else seemed present. Bob glanced around the brightly lit room, looking for the client, and wondering what his friend meant by tinted windows. Even through the mask, Bob could clearly see the traffic outside. Everything seemed normal. Maybe with a slightly reddish glow. It was autumn after all. The clicking increased, and Bob stepped forward, ready to continue. The client must be short, or something.
Hey, perv. Bert?
Something wet was underneath the employee's shoe. The floor shouldn't be wet at all. He had cleaned it and dried it beforehand. Red splatters with odd chunks of hair, bits of fabric, and large, fleshy chunks of something were everywhere. Bob's camera followed the messy trail up the floorboards to what seemed like the source. Just in front of the door was the main splatter zone. Just what did his friend do? He shrugged. Okay, the companion may have been a bit extreme, but hey, his boss drugged him.
Damn, did you kill those kids too?
Loudly mocking his employer, Bob walked out and stood across from his boss.
You're a real sick... Go.
The young employee's voice trailed off. He stood there, staring at two small glowing dots, surrounded by the dark eye sockets of a baboon skull with a bony jaw moving up and down on the employer's head. But no human facial details could be seen. The clicking sound came from the jaws.
Wait, you're wearing a skull too?
The clicking jaw moved faster, and the sound got louder. A shiver ran up Bob's spine. His boss's attention wasn't on him. It had never been on him since the young man entered the room. Someone else was in that room. Someone was behind Bob.
Who's there?
Fear radiated off the young man as he slowly turned around with his camera in the lead. Something dropped from the ceiling, followed by dripping noises. Seeing no one behind him, Bob glanced slowly upward, his face contorting into horror at the sight of a head significantly mutilated with one eyeball dangling from the ceiling light. Carlos's head. He dropped his phone into a puddle of blood and flesh as Bob ripped off the pig
What the
skull.
fuck is wrong with you?
He screamed in fear and anger, not knowing how to truly respond to the wretched sight. The clicking sound faded as his bony chin came to a stop. His attention fell on Bob, who was staring back at the baboon skull. Shaking in fear, the young employee backed away, ready to make his escape. But an eerie, bone-crackling noise crawled up like an insect from his shoulder to his ear. Ringing filled Bob's ears. The room spun. Then everything went still. The young man's head was on the floor, in the corner near the hallway, looking at his boss's shoes, still conscious. His body was gone, and blood rained all over the shop.
My apologies, dear Bob.
Those were the last words the young employee heard as a beastly foot, not belonging to his employer, stepped in front of the young man's eyes, and the world went dark.